The sea had a smell to it in King's Landing, even when you could only sense it through stone and smoke and the breath of a dying city. Eddard Stark could taste tar and rot on his tongue as he lay awake beneath the cracked plaster of the Tower of the Hand, a man listening for footfalls that could be friend or doom. The lantern guttered. The wind caught the flame and pressed it to the glass so a smear of light crawled across the floor, then ebbed back into a timid halo. His broken leg throbbed in pulses like distant drumbeats. He told himself pain was honest. Everything else in King's Landing was not. He had sent his letters. He had sent for the city watch. He had thought the truth would be armor. The city answered with whispers and knives in the dark. In the hours before dawn, when even the drunks in the flea-bottom alleys fell to murmurs, he heard a soft click at the chamber's inner door. "The spiders prefer quiet places," the voice said from the shadows. "The loud ones get stepped on." "Come into the light," Ned said. His hand found the dagger on the bedside table. It was his own steel and felt steady. A pale oval of a face came forward, eyes black and bright as spilled oil. Varys wore a simple gray cloak. His scent a faint garden of powder and lilac as if to mock the dust and sweat of this fortress. He glanced once at Ned's bandaged leg and then down at his own soft hands, as if apologizing for them. "They will move tonight," Varys said. "The Queen is a quicker player than you, my lord. She and the boy prince will act the moment the king's last breath is cold. I would say you have walls, but your walls have ears, and your ears have been sold." "The city watch," Ned said, tasting ash. "They will wear cloaks of gold in the morning sun." The eunuch agreed mildly. "Who owns the sun is a separate question." Ned stared at him. "You warned me before. You speak and never say why." "Oh, I say why," Varys murmured, "because I love the realm. More than kings and more than men who are honest enough to be murdered by it." He lifted his chin. "You think yourself doomed. I tell you there is a path that is not doom. It leads through stone and under a skull larger than a cart and out onto black water. It is a coward's way, perhaps. Perhaps it is a wise man's way. I have made arrangements. A boat will wait at the base of the cliffs. She is nameless. I thought you might appreciate the modesty." "My daughters," Ned said. His throat trembled on the word. Arya darting like a shoal fish. Sansa standing like a bow in wind and thinking herself a swan. "They are here. You cannot lift them both with that leg," Varys said gently. "Nor can you carry one child past a city taught to see you as a rebel. The girl with the wolf's eyes is already a shadow. I have set a man from the Night's Watch to find her and lead her north. He is good with children and bad with patience. That will do. The other—" He let the rest trail into the dimness and shook his head, a sorrowful priest. "She is a dear sweet hostage whether you stay or run." Pieces of the map rearranged themselves behind Ned's eyes, the faces of men whose hands he had shaken. Littlefinger's sly smile, as if every word had a hook buried in it. Cersei's eyes like polished amber showing nothing but the one who looked in. And Stannis Baratheon, made of corners and certainty, waiting with his island's black bones underfoot and a cold fire burning behind his teeth. He had sent a letter to Stannis, the Book of Lineages as proof, a plea to come at once. He had heard nothing back. Still, he knew the man. Stannis would not be swayed by a secret note. Stannis needed a voice he could not dismiss. Stannis needed a man he had once despised to stand in front of him and say what was true. "I will be thought a coward," Ned said. "You will be alive to be thought of," Varys said. "And do something with the thinking. I swore to Robert." The name came out like a cough of grief. The wind pressed the lantern flame again and shadows went running across the chamber floor like startled cats. "I swore to him I would guard his children and keep the realm whole." Varys' smile had no blood in it. "Guard the realm, then. Keep it whole by not letting it be claimed by bastardy and madness. If there is a king who can keep it whole, he is on a rock of old fire and eats his dinners with a knife in each hand and no salt. He will not ask for your oath. He will point to law and demand obedience. He will break himself on that if no one teaches him that men are not law. Go teach him." "Why?" Ned asked again quietly now. Because the next alternative is the Queen's boys, Varys said. And there are numbers of small folk between you and them. He spread a hand, thin and elegant as a spider's leg. I am good at numbers. The eunuch began to move, and when he moved, he was not soft. He lifted a tapestry, peered down a seam in the stones, tapped once, twice. A hand from the other side opened a passage, and a blade of air struck Ned's face, stale and cold. Varys crossed and held out his hand for Ned's arm. "Will you take the coward's way?" he asked, and managed to make it sound like a prayer. Ned thought of Winterfell's godswood, leaves whispering like secrets above a pool that knew what truth looked like and never bothered to speak it. He thought of the boar like a hill of flesh and rage that had thrown Robert onto its tusks. He thought of Catelyn's hands and Rob's hard jaw and Bran's brown eyes, and of Jon, the boy who was and was not his son, standing in snow at the edge of the world. He thought of Sansa's stiff, brave smile. He thought of Arya, somewhere in stone, learning how to be smaller than fear. He thought of what he knew about the children in the Red Keep and who their father was. He slid the dagger into his belt and reached for the eunuch's hand. They went down into the walls. The red stone changed to bitter black, and the air turned to iron and old smoke. Torches flared more blue than yellow. They passed a doorway, and Ned, without meaning to, turned his head. A skull waited inside, broad as a carriage, teeth like a palisade, sockets so deep that darkness pooled in them like tar. The dragon was gone and yet not gone, and a man could feel small standing there more than he would under stars. The passage narrowed. Somewhere water spoke in a constant, low voice as if to itself. They came out at last into a space that was nothing but cold wind and the breath of the sea, and a ladder of iron spikes fastened to rock with a crude piety that had not expected kings or hands to use it. Ned went down that ladder one careful inch after another, the broken leg a great iron weight he dragged after him. When his boots touched a skiff, they were shaking as if they belonged to a man he did not know. "Push off," Varys murmured behind him. "The nameless boat is waiting with her nameless captain. There is a bag under the bench. Some food, a few coins, a seal. If you return to King's Landing, do not send me thanks." Ned looked back. The eunuch was no longer a man. He was already what he had always been, a rumor shaped like a person. Then the boat rocked, and the oars took hold of the black water, and the smell of tar from the river widened into the sharper, colder stink of the bay. On the far shore, the lights of the city lay like a braid of embers thrown through a net. Above, the Red Keep watched and did not see. He slept like a man falling, woke to cold spray in his beard and the iron bells of Dragonstone tolling through rain. Dragonstone's rocks were a story the earth had told when it was young and angry and wanted to frighten itself. The castle seemed grown from the same tale, all stone that could have been bone and roofs like scales. The men on the jetty were small dark marks against it, and as the skiff bumped, one stepped forward with a face like an honest map. "Ser Davos Seaworth?" the man said, tugging at the stump of finger bones in habitual reflex, almost surprised as always that they were not there. His eyes were clear gray, wary. The wind yanked his cloak and aisled him in rain. "You are Lord Eddard Stark." Ned nodded once. Pain grated from ankle to hip and back again. "You know me, then?" "I know any man who brings fire and salt into this place and speaks to our lord as an equal," Davos said with a half-smile. "Come, our maester will want to look to that leg. And our lord." He twitched his head toward the upper reaches where towers melted into cloud. "He will want to look to your proof." They climbed through hollows and arches, corridors narrower than any castle Ned had known, and wider ones whose ceilings were ribs that made a man think of bellies and hearts but not of gods. The rain had a smell of smoke in it. When they came into the maester's chamber, the air steadied. It smelled of parchment and onions and dry herbs, and of the old man himself, who stood at the far end like a relic of a steadier time. Cressen's beard was white wire, his hands the thin, tough kind a man earned by being careful with glass and men's fevers both. His eyes were bright and tired. "The king's hand," he said, and made it both courtesy and lament. "Or perhaps a man between hands." His gaze slid down Ned's leg and up again. "We will see to that." He set to work with a competence that made the pain smaller by making it known, and while he bound and braced and mixed a draft bitter as crushed bark, Davos stood at the window and looked out into rain as if he were listening to it speak a language he had learned late in life. At last, when the pain had been tied into cleaner packages and Ned's head had stopped swimming, another man came in without knocking. Stannis Baratheon had never learned how to make an entrance feel like anything except judgment. He brought a smell of damp wool and iron, and his face, that lean burning face, looked not at the man on the chair so much as through him, to whatever word might come from his mouth to be weighed against a set of laws that lived behind Stannis's eyes. His hair was salted with gray, cut close. His mouth was a line a bowstring would envy. "Lord Stark," he said. He did not say welcome. Stannis Baratheon did not say things he did not mean. "My lord," Ned said, and pushed himself up before Cresson could scold him back. "I sent a letter. I do not know if it has reached you." "It reached me," Stannis said. "Letters reach. Men rarely do. Seat." He did not take the chair by the hearth. He stood with his back to the painted table, and perhaps no man could stand there without looking like judgment. The painted table showed all of Westeros in one unbroken piece, coasts cupped like a hand. Ned's gaze shifted to the north a moment as if it might comfort him to see a green shape no larger than his palm. Then he took the leather-bound tome from the bag Varys had given, the same Varys who had one more secret to sell and had sold it to Ned at a price he would pay later. The book had the weight of old dust and old lies and the clean, innocent sleight of hand of truth. He set it on the table, opened it to the pages where the lines ran and ran and ran. Hair black, hair golden. Eyes blue, eyes green. "You know this," he said. "I know that truth can be made to look like treason," Stannis said. He did not come closer to look. He had studied those lines alone more than once. "I know the queen is false and those children are a stain. I know my brother kept me from the small council because he did not like my face. I know that law is not a garden where one picks the flowers and leaves the weeds. It is winter wheat, and one plows the whole field or starves." "Then come off this rock," Ned said. The words stiffened with pain and something harder than pain. "Come and claim what is yours by law. Bring the Stormlands to you. Bring them with something they remember. Bring them with Robert, not as a man but as memory." They followed him because he was strength and laughter, and he stood in front. If you stand in front, men will come. But they must believe the man who stands in front will not burn them to build his fire. Davos's head tilted. Cresson glanced at the doorway as if at a ghost. Stannis's mouth bent without softening. "You mean the Red Woman," he said. There was no name on his tongue for her yet that was entirely his. She lingered like a smell of smoke under the rain even when she was not in a room. "She serves a god that is not mine." "She serves herself," Cresson said quietly, "and whatever old heat lives under the earth. She served no man when I tried to make an end of her." He looked down at his hands. "That was a sin and a folly. Men think we are allowed to kill monsters here and there when it is convenient. Monsters are men, and men will make monsters again if we do not teach them better." Stannis's eyelids flickered. "Maester," he said, with the faintest suggestion of respect that sounded like a stone scraped by a steel boot. "You tried to poison her because you hated her. You failed because your hate was weaker than hers. That is all." "It is not all," Ned said. He met Stannis's stare and did not blink. "If you use sorcery, even if it wins you the Stormlands will rot in the wind. Men remember the taste of a poison even when they liked the warmth it gave." Stannis hated to be told anything by a man who sounded like he knew it. He hated that more when he suspected it might be true. He stood another heartbeat, breathing in whatever argument wanted to be born and strangling it before it made a sound. At last he pulled out the chair opposite Ned and sat, so sudden and flat that the chair's legs coughed on the stone. "You want the Stormlands," he said. "You want me to win them with banners, not shadows. You think men will follow the law if it speaks with a northern voice. I think they will follow you," Ned said, "if you go to them yourself. Not as a summons, but as a man who has walked their mud and bled in their rain and remembers how their fathers stood on the trident. Robert is dead. You have his face when you are harsh and his hands when you grip a sword. You do not have his laugh. If you cannot give them laughter, then give them your back as you put yourself between them and danger, and give them proof. If you trust me enough to carry this book to them, then trust that I will speak the truth there, and that they will hear. Davos shifted by the window. They will hear you, he said, hesitant. Stormlords do not love Stannis the way they loved Robert, but they have pride like anyone. They will not like being told the law is a thing for others to keep. Show them the line from Aerys' son to Robert to Stannis. Remind them how they swore. Some will still go to Lord Renly because he has smiles and summer. But some will stand with Winter if Winter is honest. At the name Renly, something sharp went through Stannis' face and left it tighter. My brother is a peacock, he said. The word was a curse in his mouth. He can strut all he likes in the south. He is not king. I will tell him so when I see him. You will tell him, and the Tyrells will tell him he is, and he will like their words better, Ned said. But if you come with Storm's End behind you and old names at your shoulder, the Reach will remember House Gardner and how kings can be made into dust under chariots. They will choose the king who can take a city, not the one who can sow a field with gold. We must move quickly. Cresson poured the draft and offered it without being asked. Stannis ignored it, and so did Ned. The maester sighed and drank half himself, then set it aside like a man laying down an argument. Outside, the bells beat once, twice, as if naming an hour for rain. I will go to Storm's End, Stannis said. I will go myself. I will bring the men I have and the ships I have, and I will stand in Courtenay Penrose's hall and ask him if his oath means anything. If he opens the gates, then we go out into the Stormlands with proof and call on lords who have not yet sold their names for feasts. If he closes them, he will not, Davos said. Not to you. To me he might, Stannis said, with the sour honesty he kept for himself. To Lord Eddard Stark, less likely. He looked at Ned again. Will you court my Stormlords for me? I will, Ned said, and felt the weight of that the way he had felt the iron ladder under his hands. You are the king in truth. I will not bend my knee to a crown that belongs to another. I will speak as I can. I will not lie to them. Stannis nodded once, as if that had been a test someone else had once failed. Very well. We sail at dawn. The Onion Knight will choose the cove. The Red Woman will remain here. He said it flatly as a piece of weather. If she comes after me, I will send her back. You will not send her back if you let her set foot near you, Cresson said low. But I have made all the mistakes I am allowed. I am only a soft voice now. Do what you will, my lord. They sailed into a morning made of iron filings. The sea threw itself at Dragonstone's black teeth and retreated hissing. Stannis took the prow, a dark shape against a dark world, and did not move for 2 hours. Davos moved between captain and lord, his counsel a plain rope in a place he kept neat in his heart. Ned sat and watched the water and felt every jar in his leg like a lesson. The coastline unrolled itself in strips. Low headlands, flat gray beaches where driftwood lay like bones, villages that were only smoke. By noon, the sky gave up trying to be anything but rain. They did not come up to Storm's End with banners. Davos had a memory for shadows along a coast that a lesser man would not think to learn. He showed Stannis a slit in the cliff face that smelled of kelp and old storms and said nothing, only held a rope while men went along it one by one like beads on a string. The blackness swelled around them until Ned felt his heart beat to a different measure. When the stair cut into rock revealed itself, its treads slick as tongues, he climbed because elsewhere there was only water. Halfway up, with his breath coming like a saw, he smiled to himself at a thought that came unbidden. Robert would have laughed at this. Then he held the smile like a charm, as if to carry some of the other man's luck into the dark. The door at the top opened not to swords but to a man's wary face and a smell of wet wool and tallow. "My lords," the man said, "Storm's End greets you as it greets all things, with wind first." He stood back, and they stepped into a corridor where the stone was licked smoother by ages than by any mason. Torches made pools of steady light as if storms could be held at bay by stubbornness. Courtney Penrose met them in the great hall, where tapestries hung heavy against old cold. The castellan had a lean grace that spoke of knights in mail, and a face that had learned to listen before it spoke. He bowed to Stannis not as to a king but as to a man who might be one, then to Ned as to a man who had been the next thing to it. "Lord Stannis," he said, "Lord Stark, you come by a door we do not choose for guests." "It is the door that was open," Stannis said. "How stands your loyalty, Sir Courtney?" "Where it should," Penrose said. His eyes flicked to the banners around them. Some still bore a crowned stag on gold, though the crown looked drab in the torchlight. "With House Baratheon, with Robert's children." Ned stepped forward before Stannis could speak with that iron sound. "Sir Courtney," he said, "you were with us at the ford below the Trident." "I was," the castellan said, and in his voice was a tug of river light and dead men and banners wet as reeds. "Do you remember the way Robert shouted when the Arryn banners came over our left?" Ned asked. "Addition. He shouted like a man who had been given his life back so that he could spend it again. He wanted to spend it doing what he was born to do. He is dead now, and I have a book that says why his son has hair the wrong color. It is not a pretty book, and it is not an easy one either. I will not shame your hall by reading it aloud, but you should see it, and then you should choose where your oath leads you." Penrose's face did not change. He lifted a hand and a boy brought them wine. He heard them both drink, and then he nodded once at a side door, a gesture so small the ring on his finger barely gleamed. Within was a table and 2 chairs, and the sounds of Storm's End dimmed to a low animal rumble as they closed it away. They read, or rather, Ned turned pages and Penrose read, and Stannis stood by the door and watched things being weighed. The room wore silence like a coat. When at last Courtney touched the page with 2 fingers and slid them down to a line where the world had a kind of symmetry it did not elsewhere, he closed his eyes. He opened them again. "This is not easy," he said. "No," Ned said. "I swore to Robert," Penrose said. "I took his bastard under my protection because he asked me to keep the boy safe if he could not. I have Edric Storm in a chamber under a roof that leaks because all roofs leak here, and I have kept him dry anyway. If Stannis Baratheon is king, he will demand the boy for a show." Stannis's voice cut in for the first time. "I will demand him because he is a symbol of my brother and because symbols are not nothing. But I do not burn children." He said it with the offended gravity of a man repeating a rule he had never thought himself capable of breaking. Ned, thinking of the red woman and lamps flaring in a windy corridor and the way beliefs become mouths that must be fed, felt a coldness slide across the back of his neck. He kept his face steady. "Sir Courtney," he said softly, "your oath is to House Baratheon. House Baratheon is Stannis now. He is not Robert. He will not make you drunk on joy. But he is the law Robert died under and because of. Give him your gates. Give him your voices. Keep Edric in your walls while we go out and bring men to a king who will not be loved. We will bring him back to you safe when we can, and if we cannot, I will come myself and explain my failure and accept the justice you choose." Penrose tipped his head, and the gesture made something unspoken move between respect and disbelief. He turned and looked at Stannis. "My lord, I do not ask favors," Stannis said. "I ask what is mine, but I will do this. I will leave the boy here. When I am king, I will fetch him and make him my blood sworn on stone and salt. I will see he lacks for nothing. I will not kill him. That is all I can promise, because I make no promises I will not keep." His eyes were a bleak sea. "Open your gates." Penrose inhaled and let it out. "Open the gates." He told a world of stone, and it did not change the sound of the storm outside, but it changed what men might do under it. They hung the crowned stag with a plain iron crown over the hall and lit more torches. Ned slept that night in a chamber cut into the cliff face where the storm rattled the shutters like anger, and dreamed of Winterfell's godswood and a king's face made of wind and rain. In the morning, Storm's End woke to work. Messengers were sent out on horses that hated rain less than most. A banner was made and cased. Black Field, Crown of Iron, Stag Rampant. Ned took the book and a letter bearing Stannis' seal, and Davos at his shoulder, and they rode to Stonehelm. The road to Stonehelm ran through a country that remembered violence even when it was quiet. The trees there were not delicate. They grew like men who had learned to bend early and set themselves, not to be uprooted easily. Farms had ditches dug not just for water, and the men in the fields wore knives because knives were part of a belt the way a buckle was. The rain came and went like a temper. At Stonehelm the sea beat on rocks as if asking to be let in, and the banners snapped above the gate as if impatient with waiting. Lord Gullion Swan received them in a hall hung with hunt scenes painted with a hand that liked order more than chaos. He was not old, but he had a stillness to him that made rushing around him seem foolish. Beside his chair stood a man with the swan nose and a soldier's ease in his skin, Balon, who had a gaze a shade too sharp for the room. House Swan liked balance and had learned to keep it by keeping options. "We have had ravens," Lord Gullion said when the bread and salt were done and damp cloaks hung. "We have had them from King's Landing and Highgarden and Storm's End. The Reach promises bread. The Lannisters promise gold. Storm's End promises the law. The law does not promise to feed you," Balon said with a slant of his mouth. "The Reach can do that without trying. The law promises that when the Reach is done feeding you, they will not tell you your name was a mistake," Ned said. He put the book on the table and the letter next to it. "The boy in King's Landing is not Robert's son. Lord Stannis is king since Robert is dead. He will not laugh much. He will not make friends where he can make order. But his back is a wall. You can put your people to it and know it will not be pulled away because someone offered him a banquet." "That is a pretty way to say hard things," Lord Gullion murmured. He read the letter, and then he looked at the seal longer than men look at wax. "I do not love Stannis," he said without compunction. "But I do not love King's Landing. I do not love boys who taste their power before they have cut their teeth. The Reach sends summer. Summer spoils meat if you leave it too long." He set his palms flat on the table. "Stonehelm is yours, my lord." Balon's sharp gaze did not dull. "You will want levies and riders. We will want stone when stones are needed," Davos said with that plain rope of truth. "Men who know how to hold a road and not lose it to the first pretty face that rides across the hill with rose petals tied to his horse's mane." Balon's mouth crooked in spite of him. "We can do that." They left Stonehelm with a company of men who had a way of looking at the sky as if skies could lie in horses that did not startle at thunder. From there they went west into the marches, where the land remembered dragons and Dornish spears both and had decided to trust neither. At Nightsong, Lord Bryce Caron met them with velvet grace and a band of gold as thin as a knife dulled and polished over years. He wore his kindness like a well-tailored garment, and his hall was bright with singers despite the weather. His smile was Renly's in miniature, and it did not reach his eyes. "Stannis is not a man for songs," Lord Bryce said after the courtesies were observed. "We are all tired of old thunder. We want a king who will dance his banners across the plain and make the harvest feel light." "The harvest is not light," Ned said. "The harvest is backbiting work and blisters. You know that, Lord Bryce. You also know that law is the only thing that keeps men from calling their desires by prettier names. Renly is your friend. He is not the king." Lord Bryce lifted a hand and a boy came forward with a lute, then faded again at a small flick of the Lord's finger. "My men will go where their lord goes," he said. "My lord will go where his heart tells him to go. And my heart says the realm will not follow a man who speaks with a mouth full of iron filings. It will follow a man who does not sell it to his friends," Davos said and caught Lord Bryce's eyes. "I have sold things in my day. I know what a bargain smells like. A king is not a bargain." For a breath, Lord Bryce's smile narrowed. Then he spread his hands. "You will have bread and salt for the night, my lords. In the morning I will send you away with a basket of pears and a coin that has Robert's head on it. The pears are real. The coin is no longer. They left Night Song with rain in their hoods and the knowledge that words do not always beat songs. At Black Haven, the young Lord Beric Dondarrion received them with a fire in his hall and in his eyes both. He had the look of a man who had not yet learned where his limits were and therefore did not respect them. He would fight well and die fiercely, and the men around him would love him because of it. He took the book. He frowned over its pages. He set it down as if the letters smelled of smoke. "Renly has asked me to bring my banners to him at Bitterbridge," he said. "He promises to give me the vanguard. And if you fall, he will give it to another," Ned said. "Stannis does not promise such things. He promises the law. You will not be first or prettiest, but you will not be a piece in a game played for laughter." Beric looked into the fire and saw things in it men see when they are half in love with glory. "I will come to Storm's End," he said finally. "I will listen there again." Evenfall Hall stood on an island that wore its cliffs like armor. Selwyn Tarth received them with a courtesy that had a countryman's awkwardness to it, but his eyes were shrewd and blue and sometimes went unexpectedly soft when they moved to a tall young woman at the far end of the hall whose hair caught candlelight like an improbable fire in the stormy place. She was at sword work with a man who moved clumsily and talked too much. She moved with a care that was all concentration and no feathers. She was not beautiful in the way singers make songs about, but she was more arresting than many beauties, a thing true to itself in a room full of practiced gestures. "My daughter Brienne," Lord Selwyn said, somewhere between apology and pride. "She prefers the yard." "Men prefer what they are allowed to be good at," Ned said. "The yard rewards effort." Brienne had stopped to listen. Her face was plain and earnest. "Lord Stark," she said, and the words came out unadorned. "I am told in songs that you are merciful when you can be, and hard when you must." "I try," Ned said. "Is Lord Renly the king?" she asked. The question hung there as if she had been testing it alone for days. "No," Ned said simply. Her jaw tightened a fraction. "He came to Evenfall when I was a girl," she said. "He danced with me because no one else would." Her eyes stayed on Ned's. "That was a kindness I will not forget, but I will not build a kingdom from a kindness." Lord Selwyn looked at his daughter as if puzzled anew by the person she insisted on being. He turned back to Ned. "We hold to Storm's End," he said, cautious but firm. "We hold to House Baratheon as we have done. Tell your lord that Tarth is small, but our stones are harder than they look." They crossed Fellwood where the pines hissed under rain like an audience being quieted. They spoke to men whose names had been forgotten by singers and remembered by tax collectors. Some hung back. Some came forward and set their hands to Stannis' cause as if setting their weight to a wheel that had been heavy for a long time. By the time they returned to Storm's End, leaner with tiredness and heavier with men, ravens had flown. Renly had left the capital with a springtime in his train. He was making a court at Bitterbridge where banners were garlands and horses pranced as if they knew they were being looked at. "Renly asks me to come to him," Stannis said, the parchment in his hand wrinkling with the anger he would not show anywhere else. "He writes as if he is doing me a favor." "Go to him," Ned said, "under banners, with Stormlords at your shoulder, not to ask but to tell. Tell him he is not the king, and offer to name him heir if any child you might have by your lady dies without issue. That is a hard gift. If he refuses, he is refusing a thing he cannot replace." Davos nodded. "And if he agrees, you can take King's Landing before the Lion and the Rose have time to make a wreath." Stannis grunted something like a laugh that had cut itself on the way out. "Very well," he said. "We will go to Bitterbridge." They went like weather. Roads filled with men who did not sing much and sharpened their knives with stones that had been their fathers. They came out of rain into a country laid so gently it seemed the sky had smoothed it with its palm. Bitterbridge sat near the river Mander in a sprawl of tents and pavilions as bright as a spilled paint pot, and the smells there were roasting meat and crushed grass and perfumes that tried too hard. The Tyrell roses were everywhere, as if they could outnumber law by scent. Renly's pavilion was taller than most with green silk that tossed like a field in wind, and at its entrance stood a knight in green armor whose white cloak fell in a way men notice and whisper about. Ser Loras Tyrell looked at Stannis with contempt glittering like a cut gem, and at Ned as if at a memory from a song his sister liked that he did not. "King Renly will see you," he said, and made king sound like a prize in a game he liked. Renly sat on a chair that had not been carved to be a throne and therefore wanted to be one more. He wore green velvet slashed with gold and a crown of roses and horns. He was the handsomest man in the room and knew it without being punished by it. His smile reached everything it reached and asked nothing of it. At his shoulder stood a woman with hair like rich chestnuts and eyes like wells that reflect a house you want to live in. Marjorie Tyrell, a queen of something even if it was only of glances and summer. Behind them towered a figure in blue plate and a cloak like a deep pool. The woman from Tarth, now in Renly's service, her broad face set in the seriousness of a vow. When she saw Ned, her gaze moved, then steadied. It was a kind of salute. "Brother," Renly said, with a light that was not warmth. "Lord Stark, I am told you come with storms in your pockets." Stannis did not bow. "Renly," he said, "you are not the king. You know the law. Yield to me. I will make you heir. You will have your summer then, when I am dead. Meanwhile, you will have all of your houses and your feasts and the Reach's friendship, if you can keep it without a crown." Renly's smile went thinner. "I have the Reach's friendship now," he said, "and the Stormlands, and a boy on a throne in King's Landing who thinks himself a man. He will fall to me like a rotting apple. The realm needs a king the people can look at without flinching. Stannis, you scowl as if the heir offended you. They will not love you. They will love me." "They do not need to love a king," Stannis said. "They need to obey one who obeys the law. If you defy me, you are a usurper against your own house. And if I obey you, I will be putting a flint-hearted fool on the throne until he dies," Renly said, and there was something genuine in the bitterness under the grace. "Brother, you were made to sit in judgment, not to dance at a feast. The realm needs more than a constable. It needs a king who can make lords stop bickering long enough to be afraid of him in the same way and for the same reasons." Ned took a step forward. "Renly," he said softly. It was not his place, but he had lost any sense for places since he came to this tent city that smelled of rain and arrogance. "I stood beside your brother when he took a crown. He did not ask the realm if it loved him. He led men who would rather have been anywhere else to a river full of blood, because if they did not go that day they would spend 10 years dying by inches. You want the realm to love you. It will love you while you hand out bread. It will love you less when you hang men for stealing other men's bread. It will hate you when you ask their sons to die. Love is not a thing crowns are made from. Do not break the law because you think it is unloved. If you are a good man, wait for your turn. If you are not a good man, then you should not be king." Silence moved across the pavilion like a shadow of a cloud. Ser Loras flushed. Marjorie's head turned a fraction. The woman in blue armor watched Renly's mouth with a stillness that was worse than any trembling. Renly's smile returned because he had made it a tool, and he would use it even when it did not fit what he felt. "And what of the realm if we put my grim brother on the throne?" he asked lightly. "What will the small folk do when a man who never smiled except to count someone's mistakes tells them when to plant and when to sow and when to die? They will starve of cold." "They will not starve of lions," Stannis said. "Choose." Renly looked at him with a sudden nakedness that showed hurt and pride and the raw conviction that he had been born to be better than other men because he was better at being looked at. "No," he said, and to Stannis alone, as if the rest were a wall. "No." Outside, rain hissed on silk. Inside, men breathed and waited for other men to decide to be fools. Ned saw a dozen ways this could end in blood in a pretty tent and then in mud by the river, and behind his eyes Sansa stood in a high room with a window, a bird who had been told it was a cage. He stepped back. His leg flared and then steadied like a lamp. "Then we go," Stannis said, because there was nothing else he could say. "When you come to me later, do not expect a feast." Renly's gaze moved on as if this were a game piece that had been taken and the board remained. "I will come to you when I am done," he said, for the benefit of the men in the tent as much as for himself. Then he lifted his voice and laughter returned to the air far too quickly, as if trained like a hound. They rode out from Bitterbridge with less than they had wanted and more than would have been possible without hard truth. Some March's lords peeled away from Renly that night. Some only waited to see which way the wind would make their banners lean. The Tyrells were a field of green watching the shadow of a cloud and measuring rain. The Red Woman was far from all of it, but Ned felt as if she had managed to throw a net around the very notion of decision anyway. On the road east, a company in green and gold came behind them at a hard pace, as if men rode with teeth clenched and bile in their mouths. Davos spotted them first as shadows that did not match the trees. "They come to bite," he said. "They ride like men who think speed is a virtue by itself." Stannis turned in his saddle and his mouth went flat. "We go to the copse," he said. "The road narrows there. The horses must slow. Men will get in one another's way if they want to be heroes." Ned measured the ground with his eyes, as familiar with terrain as with maps, and felt an old part of himself wake. The man who had followed Robert into storms and told him when the ground would hold and when it would eat his horse. The copse thickened the road like a throat. He sent men with axes into it, told them to cut low, to leave sap to bleed slowly, to make roots into snares. He ordered a rank of shields at the mouth and another 20 paces behind, and between them stakes sunk with malice. Then he stood in the mud and listened to the coming of the men in green like a second rain. They burst around the bend with the eager stupidity of men told they are invincible. The first line saw shields and tried to wheel heroically. The second line saw the first wheel and tried to wheel sooner. Horses went down, legs broken in snares they could not see in the mud. Riders pitched and flailed. The Reach Knights behind them rode into a narrowing funnel of their own making and could not be heroes because there was nowhere to swing a sword. A few tried anyway and struck their friends. The men in the back saw nothing but green capes a little too bright for the day. "Hold," Ned said, softly to the first rank, and then, when the moment came and men's throats were exposed in their confusion. Now, the shields opened like a gate no one had seen and the stakes groped forward like teeth. The fight was short and ugly. When it was done, a young man in green whose helmet had come off lay in the mud staring up at a sky that was tired of watching. He could have been any man in the Reach. He could have been a child. Ned knelt and closed his eyes, then grunted at the pain in his leg and got back up the way men do when there is still something to do. "Take their banners," Stannis said. "Send them back with their men and a warning, and a message for Lord Renly." He thought because Stannis did not like saying things without thinking them all the way through. "Tell him this is what law does when it is forced to. Closes doors. It does not sing." They returned to Storm's End, and now the hall felt different. Men stood taller because they had chosen. Courtenay Penrose ate with them and spoke of stores and roads and the way the old kings of Storm's End had learned to make storms into a kind of ally by knowing when to go out under them and when to use them to obscure spears. Ned slept and dreamed of Catelyn this time. Not the shape of her hands, but the shape of her mind when it decided on pity and then applied it like a poultice. He woke to a raven on the window ledge with Lannister wax on its leg. The letter was brief. The boy on the throne had ordered something monstrous done in the square. Sansa had watched. She had fainted or perhaps had not. The letter's words had no room for that. The line it spent most words on was that traitors breed traitors and a head taken on a spike is an answer that needs no further letters. Ned stood alone with the paper for a long while. The Stone of Storm's End knew about men leaning their weight into it with their foreheads. Ned leaned as if stone could give any of its calm. He did not weep. The weeping had scoured him dry in a tower several weeks ago. He had done something else now. He had not died. He had given up that honest way out. He had debts to those choices, and they were due now. When he went back to the hall, he did not show the letter. He spoke instead of numbers and bread. He spoke of roads. He asked Davos about ships, and Davos, who loved and mistrusted ships the way men love and mistrust their own talents, told him what could be risked and when. Stannis listened. Stannis did not unbend, but he nodded more often than he had in those first hard hours, and once, when Davos told a simple story about a wave and a plank and a boy who had fallen in and learned to float from fear, Stannis's mouth moved in a way almost like a smile that had been beaten flat before it came into the world. It took a fortnight to make a host that could move and not simply exist. Men are heavier than they look when you must feed them and give them wheels and make their boots last. Messengers returned with more oaths than Ned had hoped and fewer than Stannis had told himself the law would command. That was men. A letter came out of the west with a seal Ned did not know, and he slid it with a small flicker of suspicion and saw Robb's hand in the words. "Father," it began, and Ned had to sit down carefully. The words were the handwriting of a boy making himself into a man too quickly. "We have crossed the Green Fork. We are like to cross it again. The Lannisters burn and break, and we are told to break and burn. I do as I am bid and as I think is right. I have won a battle, and it felt like nothing at all in the moment and afterwards too much. Mother is with me, and I have Arya not and Sansa not and Bran and Rickon somewhere in walls that do not answer letters. I have sent men to the twins, and I have sent prayers to the gods we have and the gods you have. I do not know if this will find you. If it does, know that I am older than I should be and not as old as I will need to be. I am your son, Robb." Ned let the paper sit on the table and put his hands on either side of it as if it were a small, fragile animal he might startle. Then he folded it up and carried it into the quiet and put it in his tunic and wore it like another layer of skin. He did not know if Catelyn had written separately. If she had, it had been put to the torch by a boy with gilded antlers on his small crown. When the host moved, finally, the Stormlands went with it the way a country moves when it is not sure whether it is migrating or just stepping out to see what kind of day it is. Men carried spears and pikes, and the few horses were plain and damp-hided and did not have bards carved with flowers. The North sent no men in time. The Riverlands sent rumors and a handful of stout archers who had once guarded ferry crossings and would now guard a king. They took the road east toward the sea and then north along the coast where wind could hit them in the face and keep them honest. Storm's End remained behind them, holding Edric Storm and Courtnay Penrose with the stubbornness that kept those stones upright. On the third day out, a rider from the south brought word like a blade. Renly had broken camp and gone west with all the Tyrells glittering around him, banners fat as sails. The Reach had tired of waiting for rain and gone looking for sun. They would swing up and around and come down on King's Landing from the gold fields, carrying harvest and banners and ambition. Stannis's mouth went into a shape that did not change when men died beside him and would not change for this. He looked at Ned with a hard reliance that was almost trust. "We will beat them to the city," he said. "We will take the city before their roses perfume the air. If they find us behind its walls with a crown that fits, their songs will have to change key." "They will," Davos said. "But the lion has teeth and the dwarf has a head that knows how to use them. They will have wildfire and chains. They will have men who are not brave but are clever and willing to be cruel. Cleverness and cruelty can do a week's work in an hour sometimes." Ned thought of Tyrion Lannister, that quick tongue and quicker mind, a man who could boil an ocean down to salt crystals and carry them between two fingers and tell you it was all less than before. He thought of wildfire. He thought of a chain. He thought of a river and a bay full of ships that could be made into torches. He looked at Davos. "How many ships can you bring into the Blackwater in the dark?" "I can bring as many as will not follow me," Davos said wryly. "But if they lay a chain, you will know it because the river will slow. The current lies differently when someone has put a hand across its throat." "Then we move quickly," Ned said. "We do not give the dwarf time to test all his tricks on cats. We come by land and we come by sea, both together, with men who can climb and men who can dig and men who can swim if they must. And we send ravens to men inside the city who do not like the boy's temper. The city watch wears gold. It likes to put it in its pocket more than on its shoulders. Give them a reason to prefer us." Stannis glared as if the very notion of needing to bribe men offended him. He allowed it to offend him. Then he nodded once, grim concession to necessity. "Do what you must," he said, "so long as it is not witchcraft." They covered the last days like men striding into their own winter. Rain eased and the land turned meaner as it approached the capital. The Kingswood was a place where poachers and princes had collided for centuries, and it did not care which was which. They passed the charred remains of a village and a boy standing in it staring, and Ned wanted to stop for the boy, to fix his whole world, to give him bread and a roof and a mother who had not died of a fever and a sister who had not been taken by soldiers to be returned quieter. He did not stop. He carried the boy like another letter folded under his tunic and let it cut him when he breathed. On the night before they came in sight of the city, Ned went among the tents like a ghost of himself from a different war. He listened to men dicing, to the sound of whetstones, to the soft, rough songs sung by men who missed their wives and would never tell anyone that was why they sang. He sat with Davos for a time while the smuggler cut hard bread with a short, sharp knife and looked up at the sky as if it could tell him anything useful. Stannis stayed in his tent and did not come out. He would pace like a caged thing, and he would tell himself that caged things become gods in men's minds when they break out, and then they will call it destiny. Ned knew better. Destiny was the name men gave to the thing they had failed to plan for. In the morning, the walls of the city lifted into view like a dark, toothy grin, and somewhere across the glitter of the bay men moved ships as if playing with toys they could afford to burn. Banners snapped red and gold. The wind shifted and brought them the smell of a city that had been badly guarded for too long. At the edge of a shallow ravine, Stannis reined in. He drew the sword from his side, not as if to kiss it, but as if to test its weight again. He looked at Ned. "When we are through," he said, "I will ask you to be my hand." Ned felt something cold and warm at once move through him like old wine. He had not wanted Robert's hand. He had worn it and done what he could. He did not want Stannis's hand. He would wear it anyway if it meant a chance to knit some small tears together. "If we are through," he said, "I will not refuse." Stannis nodded once, and that was ceremony enough for him. "Then do what hands do," he said. "Open the city." Ned took his horse down the shallow slope, and the army followed like an idea made of men. The Sea Scouts went ahead, and Davos's son, a light brave lad with a smile too like his father's for comfort, took a sloop into water that smelled of secrets. Before noon, the signal came back. The current was not the same. There was a chain, but chains can be cut, and Davos had men with saws and men with quiet hands, and a patience born of years waiting for guards to go to sleep. On land, the city watched. Ned sent men with purses that had more coins in them than some men would see in a year. He sent them to captains who had been told to love a lion and had learned that lions do not love back. He sent letters to men who had once served under Jon Arryn and had learned to despise the way the court smelled. He sent nothing to a boy on a throne. By sunset, the camps were set at the edges where villages gave up and the fields began, and the towers had that peculiar evening glow a city gets when it is only pretending to be a place. The wind had a taste like copper. Ned stood with his gauntlets off and his hands on a low wall and felt the stone hold steady under him. The storm that had been their drumbeat for weeks had gone away for the moment to gnash its teeth over some different coast. He missed it. He had learned to trust something that kept its promises that way. "Do we go at night?" Davos asked. "We go at dusk," Ned said. "When men think they can still see. When colors lie and distances fool." Stannis came up on the other side and said nothing. He simply stood, and the men around him stood more straight. The wind stirred, and in it there was a thread of some sweeter smell, like a garden after rain, and Ned felt the hair rise on his arms because he thought absurdly of the red woman and her breath like heated metal. He turned and saw no scarlet cloaks, only storm blue and the rough browns and grays of men who did not spend time to make their clothes say anything about them. He remembered Varys's face in the candlelight, the way the eunuch had watched his own hands as if they were tools that had changed, and he was not sure if they were better now. He remembered Sansa standing in a tight ring of courtiers in his memory, a bird that had learned not to flutter. He remembered Arya slipping through empty rooms like water. He remembered Catelyn's quiet rage, and Robb's gray eyes reading the world as if it were a map whose symbols he had to learn as he went. He breathed and the air burned. He looked at Stannis and saw a man who might be either a great king or the wheel that ground down men's illusions until they squealed. He looked at Davos and saw a man who would do what had to be done and feel the cost of it without parading his suffering as if it made him more noble. He looked at the walls and saw stone, and stone is a thing a man can understand. He raised his hand and gave the first signal. Banners shifted. Men moved in ways they had practiced until practice felt like the music in their bodies. The sun slid down the sky toward the edge of the bay as if it had places to be, and for a moment the water looked like poured gold. A boy in a white cloak stood on a gate tower with his arms folded and his head tilted, watching. A man beside him moved like a mind, quick and precise, and Ned could almost hear him think. The moment before a battle is a kind of silence. What you hear is what you bring to it. Ned heard the godswood's leaves and the storm's old drumming and his daughter's laughter and a soft small cough Bran used to make when he saw something he liked. He heard swords being drawn and men spitting because their mouths had gone dry. He heard Davos say something low to his son. He heard Stannis's breath come out in a steady hard line. Then the horns went. Then the bows sang. Then the world resolved into work. They went at the gate of the gods first because it had been least loved by masons and most used by merchants. The city watch came up onto the walls in bright armor that sat poorly on men who had been bought. Some of them did what they were paid for. Some of them remembered they might not be paid. Rocks fell. Arrows fell with a sound like rain on a tin roof. Ned kept moving because there was nothing else that made sense. You moved until you could not, and then if you could, you moved some more. In the bay, Davos's sloops slid like knives under the chain, and then there was a jerk and a groan and a crack and the sound of a thing that had been sure of itself being made unsure. A cheer went up from a corner of the shore where men were not entirely sure what they had cheered for, but knew it was good that someone had done something. Ned's men put ladders to stone and climbed, eyes on stone and hands on wood. Some fell and were replaced by men behind them whose hands were shaking but whose feet found rungs anyway. On the wall, a captain of the gold cloaks lifted his spear and then lowered it and then lifted it again. He looked at the men around him and at the men below him and at the invisible purse that would be placed into his half-open hand if he made the right call. He made it, or perhaps the men around him did, because suddenly a patch of bright armor moved hard at the men in lions, and the lords who had thought they controlled bright metal in men's hands found they did not. The gate's bar groaned as if it had opinions. The gate opened. Stannis did not charge. He did not throw himself into the breach to make a symbol of himself. He walked his horse in at a steady pace, sword in his right hand, face like stone that had been told to hold. Ned came on his left, and Davos, who was unimportant to banners but not to men, came a little behind and to the side, and together they passed under the teeth of the gate into a city that would remember this smell forever. After, men would tell it in different ways. How torches rose and fell. How the hound who loved and hated fire both had cut through a knot of men as if he could not bear to be still. How crossbow bolts had hummed at an angle like angry bees around Stannis's head, and how an arrow had gone under his arm and left a line of red that looked tidy even then. How a boy in a crown had screamed from a balcony far above, and how his mother's hand had been on his shoulder like a clamp made of gold and flesh. How bells had rung without pattern because the men who rang them had lost count of the reasons to do it. But the best way to tell it was to say that men did the work they had to do until the work began to look like victory in certain streets and not in others, and then the balance shifted and men could smell which way it was going and began to move that way. Some lions roared, and some went home and took off their cloaks. Some roses tried to open and found there was too much smoke. When they reached the steps of the Great September, a woman stood at the top with a small hard face like a knife honed too much and a child's hand in hers, and the way her head turned was a hawk's. She looked down at Ned with a gaze that was not his to have, and then past him at Stannis, and then past Stannis at a place in her mind where a golden-haired man smiled in a bed. She did not flee. Cersei Lannister did not flee easily. She did not kneel either. She simply looked down at men doing a thing she had thought she had made impossible. Ned thought of Sansa and did not stop moving. The men behind him began to chant without meaning to, a rough, ugly sound that carried only the sense that they were together. The doors of the Red Keep did not open for them that day. A city is not taken in an afternoon unless it was never a city to begin with. But by sunset men in gold cloaks were saluting a black banner with an iron crown, and down by the river Davos put his hand on a wet chain that would never be raised whole again and said something simple to his god. Stannis stood on a rise of ground where he could see the city stretched like an animal breathing hard, and his face was the face of a man who had climbed a long stair and left bits of himself on the treads. Ned stood beside him, mud stiff on his boots, dried blood on his sleeve, grief in his chest like a coal he no longer tried to spit out. The wind came off the bay and lifted the black stag and made it crackle. He looked up at the standard, at the plain iron of the crown, and it seemed absurdly modest. It was not a crown for singing about. It was a crown a man could work under. "Tomorrow," Stannis said, "we go up." His voice had no triumph in it, only obligation. "We will hear petitions. We will hang men who must be hanged. We will do the rest. The boy and his mother will be dealt with according to law." "Tomorrow," Ned said, and felt the word land with the weight of a hammer. He glanced south, where the road became width and distance and then disappeared into the idea of the reach. Somewhere beyond that distance, Renly Baratheon was riding between green banners and sunlight, believing in himself with a conviction that could move men until it broke against something harder. Ned did not know if the broken thing would be a wall or a man's heart or a piece of law that had forgotten how to be merciful. He only knew that the Stormlands had answered, and not for love of thunder, but because the law had been brought to them not as a rod but as a spine. "Hand," Stannis said, and the word stripped doubt away. He turned to Ned with a face that would never be kind and would never be false. "I name you Hand of the King. You will take the beside me and carry out the law with mercy where it can be and iron where it must." "I will," Ned said. "There are vows and there are things a man says because they are already true." He felt the weight clamp around his heart and stand him up straighter. He thought of Winterfell and the old gods and a girl learning to hold a sword too big for her and a girl holding a birdcage with empty hands. He thought of Catelyn. He thought of Robb. He thought of the boy who had once called him father in a voice that still had snow in it. He thought of a kingdom that had been bent like a branch in a heavy wind and might yet be straightened if one pushed it gently and at the right place. The wind freshened. The sea made its endless arguments with stone. From somewhere down in the city came the indistinct rumble of men in 1,000 rooms telling 1,000 versions of the same story. Ned lifted his face into the wind and let the salt sting his eyes until the world swam and steadied again. Night came in stages. Torches pricked into life along the walls like a rash on skin. The clouds moved off the moon and then back across it, reluctant to give it up for good. Ned did not sleep. He walked the lines while men drowsed in their armor, and he sent a letter north with a rider who had a good horse and a better chance than most. He wrote to Robb and told him the truth as he always had with that boy. He wrote to Catelyn and did not lie to her either. He wrote Sansa's name at the bottom and let his hand stop there because he did not have the magic that could add anything realistic after it. Dawn came bleached and early. The first bird that sang was in a thorn bush under the wall, and men who heard it almost laughed. Ned flexed his hands into his gloves and went to the place where Stannis waited with Davos beside him like a piece of plain good luck. Together they took the first steps toward a keep that would not welcome them and a throne that would resist being taken like anything else that had taken on too much history. Together they went up, a slow, relentless climb. The city watched. The sea watched. The gods watched if they were watching at all. And over the road they had come by, in the last of the night's rain, prints were filling with water and the wind was erasing edges, and the Stormlands were still under rain, its trees and farms and watchful lords learning the new shape of a name they had heard but not loved. They were learning that men could carry storms forward without making them darker, and that law could be a house if you fixed the roof and shared the key. They were learning that if a man without laughter stood before them and did not lie, they might stand behind him and not be ashamed, because the shield his back made was the right shape, and the blows that fell on it were blows no banners could have turned aside alone.